Yeah. All right, I gotta get on this thing here. I gotta get into gear, Mary, before I get yelled at by Mary.
Jeez, it was taking a minute to go live.
There's
There we
been an
go.
ito with this thing from time to time. I don't know what the deal is with this.
Okay, there we go.
I like to think it's not user or on your part, but I think it's okay. Let me just get into this as well. Not that I read the comments because my eyes are so goddamn bad I can't even read half of them, but I will do this. I will do this. Okay, I
All right.
am. And we're walking. Anyway,
Okay. Well, we are live now. Good morning,
we are.
everybody who's not on here yet.
Yeah, well, it's okay. People might watch it later, but it's a
Yeah.
beautiful day in the neighborhood, Mary. It's a sunny day, and rumor has it that my ass is getting dragged to the beach later.
Well, we didn't go last year, so.
No, I know. It's okay. We got some new books to
Oh,
read too,
good
so that's
afternoon, Ryan. Ryan's on here from England. Haven't seen him in a while.
that's right. I've seen Ryan on social media. He's keeping up with his shenanigans.
Mhm.
Always, he's like us. He always seems to have a good libation in his hands. That's a
Yeah,
good
or
thing,
book.
or a combination thereof.
Yes.
Right, right.
Morning, David.
Oh, Dave, that's David. David
Scott.
Maxwell.
Yeah. Morning,
Very
Scott.
cool. Very cool. Dave Maxwell. We couldn't see him a couple weeks ago in Gettysburg. That was a good
Yeah,
time.
that was a really fun time.
You were missed, David. You were missed, but we'll catch up
Yep.
with you soon. You definitely missed. So yeah, so it's a lovely Saturday. So that's pretty cool. So I get to do this and do some stuff later on. I still have tomorrow. So what's going on in your little world?
Well, considering we live together, you know.
Yeah, same thing. I get yelled at recently, so that's pretty good.
Please don't. The
That's
hell?
good. That's all good.
Morning, Rob.
See right there. See, that's why. Anyway, yeah, so we didn't do an episode this week because we were too busy doing other stuff and other aspects of our lives. But we have a good one next week, I
Yes, we're
think.
going to be talking about General Lew Wallace finally.
Lou Wallace, you mean the guy who
Yep.
killed Billy the Kid? The guy who screwed up Shiloh? The
God.
guy who invented New Coke? You know?
Poor Lew
Oh
Wallace.
yeah, no, that, you want to talk about
Before
the
we
guy?
get to that, though,
Mhm.
Grant had a question. What did you get up to in Gettysburg?
What do we get up to?
Yeah, Grant asked that.
Oh, about 5'10". No, never mind. No, so we did a whole bunch of stuff. We did a presentation at the Masonic Lodge. I portrayed Colonel Edward Cross, and Mary did Elizabeth Thorne. We
Yep.
did that. There was about 50 or 60 people in the house. It was good. Our friend MJ was with us as well,
Yep.
and we just kind of did other stuff. We went to kind of do some of the off the beaten path stuff, like two taverns we went to.
Yep.
We went to St. Joseph's to see where Howard stayed, for
The
instance, Royce
night
Tavern.
before. Yep.
Yeah, and then we visited bars.
Yep. Oh, and we did an event with the awesome folks over at Getty's Gear, raise money for the World War
That's
II
right.
Museum.
That's right. That's right.
Our friend Jody helped out with that too. But yeah, if you're in Gettysburg, get to Getty's Gear because they have like coffee, cigars, souvenirs. They've got dog treats, cat treats, all that. And they've got a really great like they sell cider there so you can get a drink, but they also have like to go sandwiches and other drinks and all that. But yeah, go check them out because they've got a great space there. It's just over on, is that Baltimore Pike?
Yep.
Yep, on Baltimore Pike.
Right across. If you know the area, it's right across from the Jenny Wade house, like right across. You
Yeah,
can look out the window and smoke, and you can see Jenny Wade's smiling face in the statue, which
yeah,
just got cleaned, by the way. You see that?
yeah.
They cleaned it. But no, we did a lot of stuff in Gettysburg, and there's a lot of stuff to do. Gettysburg campaign anniversary started on June 3rd. It's ongoing, and
Yeah.
of course, the culmination is the battle here, the 161st anniversary. And there's a lot of anniversaries. We're coming into that battle season now, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of cool stuff coming. But definitely get out there and enjoy it, especially when the weather's like it is. Because although it's tough to walk in certain places because of the snakes and the ticks and the
Yeah,
grass and
it's
everything else.
way, I mean, winter's a better time to kind of get, see a little bit more or whatever, but I'm just gonna post a link to Getty's Gear in the chat in the
No, you
comments.
should. They're good partners of ours, but there's a lot of stuff to do.
Oh,
Like we said, all the time. Oh, we got to the Gettysburg thing quick this time. That's a new record.
yeah,
But
well, we're gonna get
if you,
back to Lew Wallace though.
right, if you go to Gettysburg, and I know a lot of people go there more than you probably should, but if you go to Gettysburg, expand your horizons out a little bit, right? You want to go to you want to go to Monterey Pass. You want to do the Lee Escape. You want to go out towards Frederick. You want to go to the Pipe Creek line. You want to go towards Emmisburg and Tawnytown and Union Bridge and all the cool places, two taverns. You can go out there to Hunterstown, see all the cavalry
Mhm.
action. There's so much stuff to do off the battlefield. And rumor has it, Mary, that Little Round Top will be opening soon.
Yeah.
But even if it's not,
There's
there's so
still
much.
so much to see there. You have like so many thousands of acres to explore. That is not Little Round Top.
You got 6,000 acres, but I mean, even beyond that,
Yeah.
you could go over to Wrightsville, go to the Wrightsville Bridge, which
Yeah.
where John Brown Gordon, burned that whole.
Yeah.
He didn't really burn it, but he helped put it out. But there's a lot of stuff you can see in that area if you kind of get out of the burg, as we like to say, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, you could go to Gettysburg. You could live there full time and you can go out every weekend. It'll take you years to see everything. There's
Yeah.
so much for really just a 3-day battle, but you forget that it's basically a 6-week campaign going from
Mhm.
June 3rd to July 13th and all that stuff that you can kind of sandwich
Yeah.
into it. But there's so much to go into it. So hopefully people get out, even if it's obviously, I think there might be battlefields in the West I've heard about, Mary. I don't know if you've heard
Chickamauga.
this. Really?
Well, Gentilly would say
Yeah,
LD is the Western thing, but yeah,
right.
like, but I mean, the other battle to visit, and this has a connection to Lew Wallace, is Monocacy. It's
Okay.
maybe half an hour, 40 minutes away from Gettysburg. It's an amazing battlefield to visit. One of my favorite things there, and my friend Laura mentioned this to me, is you can see Wallace's jacket. They have his like frock
Right.
coat there. But that's known as kind of the battle that saved Washington D. Is that the battle that saved Washington
It's
D.C.
a
when he was there?
battle of Save Washington. We did an episode on it, and it's a fascinating battle because really it's almost exactly a year after Gettysburg. It's July
Yeah.
9th, 1864. And this is kind of someone said, I read somewhere, someone wrote it really was the true Confederate high watermark of the Confederacy, I guess.
Our friend AQ
And
said that.
I
And
don't
I
really
can
so much,
see, yeah,
no,
I
I
can
don't
see where
really
she's
agree with
coming from
that
with
too.
that.
Well, yes and no, yes. Because
That's what I mean. I can see it, but not like
I mean,
it's debatable.
if you're gonna go with geography, then St. Albans would be
Yeah.
theoretically. But it was the thing about Monocacy was it wasn't really. Someone else said this is one thing I didn't agree with, and she's not wrong, but they said that it was Lee's last invasion to the north, and I guess
Oh, that was
theoretically,
a guy that said that to me. It was a
and
person
and
who
I and
said
I
that
and
to
I,
me, and
and
I
I,
was
I
like,
don't think
no.
I would disagree with that because really all it really was a diversion for the most part that Jubal Early and guys like McCausland, the cavalry, to
Yeah.
kind of go up into Washington D.C. and just cause a lot of problems, and really for the most part try to pull troops away from the Union who was sieging Petersburg
Yeah.
and say, Earl was like, let's take some men up and we'll try to do this. And they took 14,000 guys. They took a lot of people,
Mhm.
but we're going to head north. We're going to force Meade to react. I mean, Grant to react, and he did. He sent the whole Sixth Corps, a portion of it anyway, to
Yeah.
help defend you at the Battle of Fort Stevens. Everything went from there. But really, and what's funny about it is we'll talk a lot about this when we do Wallace's episode. But initially, he was panned for that. It was, oh, here's Lew Wallace again getting his ass kicked, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. He sucks. But then it wasn't until the man with the hat, Mary Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
kind of said, you know something, not for nothing, but we had plans to evacuate me and my family to New York City on a
Yeah.
boat. And because he stalled them long enough, I didn't have to leave the city. So I
Yeah.
think it's a pretty good deal. And Jubal Early himself said that he foiled his plan to take Washington. Make no mistake about it, they weren't gonna take Washington and hold it.
No.
But what they would have done is if they would have got into Washington and they would have burned buildings, they would have caused problems, even if they were only there for a day or two,
Yeah.
and they forced Lincoln out. Don't forget, this is 2 months for the election. This might be a situation where the North was said, enough is enough with this. We can't do
Yeah,
this
I think
anymore.
it would like I think people always say it's Sherman's election that sealed or Sherman's election, Sherman taking Atlanta that sealed the deal. But there's three different things that have to happen. You have to have what happens at Monocacy, making sure Early doesn't
Right.
actually get into the city. You have to have Sheridan in the valley, and that doesn't get enough. I don't know if I want to say credit. He's causing a huge
Speaking of the
ruckus.
Valley, we have to mention is the anniversary of Cross Keys today too.
Yeah.
No one ever talks about Cross Keys, but we'll get to that later. But the thing about it is Abraham Lincoln spent so much time concerned about defending Washington.
Yeah.
56 forts built around the whole city with the heavy artillery. But by then, people always talk about the Confederates losing a lot of men, but the Union was. So now Grant is pulling heavy artillery men from the forts, right? To fight in battles like Cold Harbor and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Washington's defended by basically citizens at this point. So
Yeah.
when he spent basically 3.5, 4 years defending that city, and at the very moment when he needed to defend it most,
Yeah.
he left it naked, which
Yeah.
was strange considering how much he dicked around with McClellan and dicked around with Meade and dicked around with Burnside and all these generals in Hooker to defend the city. At the moment they needed it most, it was most vulnerable. And you can make the case that if it wasn't for Lew Wallace and his 5,800 men, that's all
Yeah.
he had to hold that Monocacy line at the Monocacy Junction, and right there, they would have got right into DC. It would have forced Lincoln out, and you probably would have had a really interesting election with
Yeah.
McClellan a few months later.
Yeah.
That's why he saved Washington.
Yeah.
The battle was irrelevant. Yes, he created a speed bump and he got beat and he had to fall back. But he delayed them really 2 days, really one, but two, because early wanted a day to relax.
And
He wanted to rest.
they went and got drunk at what's his face's house. Grant has a question. Could the Union have stopped early there without sending the Sixth Corps?
Well, that's what we were just saying. It's hard to imagine because at that point, the city was a skeleton defense. You have very few soldiers in the city. They were recruiting citizens, injured invalids, citizens in the town to learn how to fire a weapon to defend the city. So it depends on how confident you are in some Washington lobbyist defending the Capitol, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of course Chantilly would. He had no problem.
He's on here.
Right? He would.
Can you see him?
He'd Rambo that crack. He'd pull his Cesnolas out, right? But for the most part, it's an interesting question because they did get to Fort Stevens, and it's the battle that Lincoln was famously at, and they did hold it. But if it wasn't for those days, I don't know. I think what probably would have happened was Early would have got into the city. He would have burned some buildings. He probably would have gone down to McClellan's retreat and got banged up over there in DuPont Circle.
Yeah.
And then what would happen? The Sixth Corps would have arrived and chased them out. But the political ramifications of Lincoln leaving the city right for the election and basically retreating would have sent shockwaves to the North, especially at that point, even post Atlanta. They were skeptical of the war continuing. Yeah. But if they get into DC and burn buildings and chase the president, I don't know. But it's a great question. Personally, I don't think they could have. They didn't.
Was Atlanta taken by that point?
Atlanta was taken in September. So you're right.
September
so this is all going on, right?
Yeah.
So you ultimately had a situation where you have guys like Early, guys like McCausland. You had the iron, and they were pissed off and they were ready for a fight, and they would have gone into that. And then if they take DC, this is where you get what if. This is where you get the people on the serious sites of Facebook called Mad Mary. What happens if they get into DC and Grant has to react by sending more than the Sixth Corps and exposes Petersburg, and then Lee escapes Petersburg because of it? What happens?
Like the ramifications. Well, Ryan asked, did Early have any instructions if he'd managed to grab anyone interesting like Lincoln or cabinet members or anything?
There was all those reports about the assassination stuff. I mean, after the Ulrich Dahlgren thing, everything kind of changed. But I don't believe so. I think the whole thing was to get up there and force Grant to react and send troops to have less people sieging Petersburg.
Yeah.
Lee was trying to find ways to get the hell out of Dodge, and he was stuck. So the easiest way is to get Union guys out of there. Yeah. And I think it would have been fascinating to see what would have happened if they got into DC. But fortunately for Monocacy and for Wallace, he was able to hold it just long enough. And that's the thing is, and when we talk about Wallace, his big picture, right, with Lew Wallace, he's a fascinating guy primarily because he is, of all the Union people that we've kind of studied, he's the punching bag. We've said this before.
He's kind of like Beauregard in a way.
He is, because he gets blamed. I mean, this is a guy right from the Battle of Romney. He's an aggressive. He's like a John Bell Hood light a little bit on the Union side. He's that kid in the classroom who can't sit still. Right? Yeah. I mean, there's that story. His first day of school, very first day. Okay, the girl next to him in class eats his pencil. So the teacher comes by and says, "Where's your pencil?" And she goes, "I don't know." She didn't drop dime on the girl. He gets paddled for not having his pencil. He goes home and goes, "Dad, I don't think the school thing's going to work out. I don't know." But that's how he was. right? And his background is a fascinating story. He's not a West Pointer.
His
He
dad is though.
his right, and he ends up doing the whole lawyer thing.
Yeah.
Doesn't take right away, and then he ends up getting in the military, and he ends up with the 11th Indiana.
Hmm.
You know, those Indiana boys, those Indiana Knights, right?
Yeah.
That's what ends up happening with him. He has Romney, and he's suddenly a rising star all of a
Yeah.
sudden. And then he ends up getting his star not far before Shiloh. And the Shiloh thing happens because at the time, at the beginning of the war, we've talked a lot about the politics, right?
Yeah.
We haven't talked a lot about how the West Point versus non-West Point politics was a big issue at this point.
Yeah.
You have a rising star in Lew Wallace, who's not a West Pointer, looking at guys like Grant, guys like Sherman, right, who are West Pointers, looking at him going, well, what the hell is this kid getting all the credit for?
Yeah.
And then when we talk about Shiloh, which is the most misinterpreted friggin' thing in the goddamn world, where it ends up being he cost the Union, and
Yeah.
he all because of an order that Grant gives verbally to his aide. The guy has in his head. He runs up to tell him, writes it down. Of course, he loses the order, has to go off memory, and goes, I think he said he wants you to get to the right of the Union line on the Confederate left.
Yeah.
When the real order was get your ass to Pittsburgh Landing.
Yeah.
So what does he do? He goes to the orders. By the time he gets to the Union left, the Union's been pushed back. The Confederates are there. He has to backtrack. He's got to find a dirt road to cut to Pittsburgh Landing, but he gets there late. And so after the battle, they win Shiloh. And if you know that, Mary, the Union won Shiloh, right? But there's 13,000 casualties, and the newspapers have never seen this before. And so everyone's in an outrage. What the hell happened? Why this bloody bloodletting? And they go, well, we got to blame somebody. You know who wasn't here initially? That Wallace would have helped.
Yeah.
He was. And so he turns into and it wasn't, and here's the other thing too. It wasn't Grant who pissed all over. It was Halleck.
Yeah.
But then what does Wallace do? He goes to Washington for the Committee on the Conduct of War, and he rats out Grant and rats out Sherman.
Yeah,
and that
saying like they were
ignoring
stuff.
And next thing you know, he gets put on the sideline.
Yeah,
he ends up going to Kentucky, where he's going to defend Cincinnati and all that. But before that, a regimental commander over in Memphis says, "Hey, we could use your help. I'm going to get attacked." He takes his whole division without orders over to Memphis. And that pisses everybody off because he's this rambunctious, I can't sit still guy.
Yeah, the thing is he disobeys orders, but when he does, it turns out for the best.
Well, that's the thing too.
It's like, wow, it turns out he was right, but he still disobeyed orders.
And so he ends up basically being tied to a desk for a while up until Monocacy. In Monocacy, he has a chance to redeem himself, which a lot of people, including Lincoln, think he did. But even after Monocacy, they said, well, he lost again. This is this guy. You know, and it's fascinating because the thing about Lew Wallace is he's somebody who, when you look at him personally, he had this revelation he did. He was a Freemason. He got his degrees in Indiana. And if you go to see his grave today, he's got the obelisk. He's got a lot of Masonic influence on his gravestone. But after the war, he ends up running into a guy named Robert Ingersoll, who was one of his staffers at Shiloh. Ingersoll was probably the most preeminent agnostic public speaker in the time.
Yeah.
This is right. So he runs into him on a train of all places, and they're talking about religion. And Ingersoll goes, basically, I'm going to make a bet with you that you're going to, that if you study religion and Jesus Christ, I will turn you into a non-believer and let you show. So that bet leads Lew Wallace to studying religion. It ends up being the genesis of how he wrote Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
Is because of a bet on a train with Robert Ingersoll. It ends up being probably the most famous book printed in that era.
Very good movie too.
Right, but he's such a fascinating dude when you study him, because he's one of the few guys you look at the pre, the during, and the post. And there's all the Billy the Kid stuff, which is another part we'll talk about, which is another misconception. I don't understand why people miss that one, but we'll talk about all this. But he's a cool study, and I think he's somebody who I think people might get more of an appreciation for when you look at him he's
very underappreciated. He's a lot like the Norse version of Beauregard, how he's kind of just sidelined. and he could have been really, really good, but he's not allowed it. Um, Morning, MJ. Grant says the Shiloh thing plagued Wallace's life, like what happened to Gouverneur Warren after getting fired. And I said that to you a few days
Pretty
ago.
much.
That
And
it's very similar to how there's so Lou Wallace does some stuff that really pisses Halleck off, but also pisses Grant off, pisses Rollins off. I can't like John Rollins is I not a fan.
mhm.
He's like Sir Hiss in Disney's Robin Hood. That's who he is.
Oh,
He's
the
just
snake.
yeah,
Well,
he's
I
just
mean,
this conniving, and I don't know, like he's also got this mother hen aspect over Grant, where he kind of like lords over him and like he's like you can whatever. But like there's a couple incidences that does not endear Wallace to any of them, especially on Grant's staff. And so what you have is something similar to Rosecrans, where there was Rosecrans probably started spreading rumors to the newspaper that Grant had been drinking at a certain point, and the newspapers got hold of it. Grant and his staff found out about it, and they, when it came time, when there was a military point where they could get rid of him, which was after Chickamauga, they did. And so what you have going into this thing with Shiloh is, and just what happens to Wallace after that and his reputation is this stuff that happens that Grant and his staff don't ever forget. And same with Halleck too. But there was one incident where Halleck or Wallace and Grant were hanging out, and this rumor came out that they were drinking and there's an orgy, and it was crazy. And it was in, I think it was in, and there was something that happened in Paducah too with one of the houses where
mhm.
Grant and Lincoln's policy was that whether they're Union or Confederate, you let them live as citizens, you let them be. And Wallace took over one guy's house, and Grant's like, you can't do that. And Wallace is like, well, he's a Confederate. Yes, I can. And Grant's like, no, that's not the policy. Then the guy flies a Confederate flag, and it really ticks off Wallace, and it becomes a whole thing, to the
Yeah,
point
but
where shockingly the media blows it out of proportion. One guy involved said this is like, he's like, it happened, but not in the way the media is portraying it. Well, Grant's staff never forgot that, nor the rumors after they had been, Grant and Wallace had hanging out one night, and what rumors started spreading, Grant was drinking again. They never forgot about that. So the opportune moment rose at Shiloh, and after that they could basically sideline him for that, for it was all a personal thing. And it goes back to this, similar to what happened with Gouverneur K. Warren and Sheridan. Sheridan had this huge thing against Warren, and
yeah.
Warren and Wallace are a lot alike in the sense that they're very arrogant. They don't do themselves any favors with that. But I mean, I'm Team Warren and I'm also Team Wallace. I don't like Sheridan. And I'm not.
Yeah, but I think what we said before is a lot of that historical memory is Grant hated Warren, hated Wallace, and sacked him.
Yeah.
It was Halleck. It really was
Oh
Halleck.
yeah. Yeah.
You know,
No, I know.
and people forget, how instrumental Wallace was at Fort Donelson.
Oh yeah.
We did a Fort Donelson. God, it must have like 3 years ago. Now it's been forever.
No,
But that
yeah.
was when Grant is on with Andrew Foote. Foote gets wounded,
Yeah.
ironically on the foot, and Grant goes to visit him on the boat and tells Wallace, "Whatever the hell you do, whatever you do, you stay where you are." And Wallace, being Wallace, he gets attacked, and then the Confederates they pulled out and started to move forward, and he decides, well, I'm going to go attack them, and he does, and he's able to push them back. Gideon Pillow surrenders, the whole deal,
Yeah.
and that's because of Wallace. Wallace is, and because of the politics of the time, all those stories get squashed, right?
Yeah.
It turns into unconditional surrender Grant, when really it was Wallace who did a lot of the lifting at Fort
Yeah.
Donelson. He
And
really I
yeah.
know he wasn't the only one by any stretch, but he did a lot. His impetuousness got him, but at the same time, even when you look at Shiloh, he was that second day when he did attack, because the reputations, he sat on his ass and did nothing, kind of like
Yes.
you, right? But
Yes.
what happened was he ended up attacking, but he always found his way on the flanks and behind the Confederates and made them
Yeah.
fall back. And he was so successful in helping push them back. And Gail Stevens' book on Shiloh does a long way in far as demystifying the misconceptions of him at Shiloh.
Yeah.
Because if you go on to the very informed Facebook sites of the Civil War, Mary, that they're out there, they will
Wow.
tell you
Yes.
that Shiloh's was screwed up by Wallace,
Yes.
right? And that's the perception of it. And that's because these stories get embedded years in the past,
Mhm.
right? And they become now, look, we see all these things, all these silly stories, but But this is one where I think he's somebody, who really, I mean, he did other stuff after the war. He was an ambassador. And people don't forget too, if you study your world history,
Yeah.
he was the one who really opened up Turkey as an
Yeah.
ambassador, where he was buddies with that the leader over there.
Yeah.
And so and it was all because of his ignorance. So
Yeah.
he goes over. I don't know if it's the Shah. I forgot the time. I'm pretty stupid when it comes to that. But whoever the leader was at Turkey, the deal was you went and visited him, and you were on his time. You wait there all day for him. If your appointment's at 1,
Yeah.
maybe you'll meet him at 5. Well, he's sitting there to meet him as the ambassador to Turkey. This is after the war, and he's like, "This guy, screw this. I'm out of here."
Yeah.
And he starts to leave, and the Turkish guy, well, we better go get the guy. He goes and brings him down. And one of the big rules is you never shake the hand of the Turkish leader. So
The
what does he
Sultan.
do? The Sultan.
Yeah.
What does he do? He sticks his hand out because he doesn't
Yeah.
know any better. The Sultan shakes his hand. They become lifelong friends and kind of opens up Turkey as far as a partner in the Ottoman Empire who was not
Yeah.
friendly with the U.S. at that point. And he gets no credit for that either. So it's kind of cool to talk about this stuff, and
Yeah. Yeah. Grant mentions that Halleck's behind the scenes attacks on generals are not mentioned enough.
no, but again, Halleck he wanted to be in charge. It
Yeah.
all goes back to that. He wanted to be the man. He saw all these guys getting credit, and he wanted a piece of it. And he attacked Wallace, he attacked Grant, he attacked pretty much everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, he went,
Yeah,
and it was with Wallace too. It was the West Point thing too, that
yeah,
not being like, I guess, quote unquote professional soldier. And there was a lot of them that felt, there's a lot of these quote unquote political generals or just people that hadn't gone to West Point that are actually quite successful. You look at someone like Blackjack Logan, Wallace, even
yeah.
Sickles. I think Minty and Wilder were another two, right? They didn't go to West Point.
Well, and again, the political generals and political officers versus the West Point officers it did thin out as the war went on. It got a little better, but at the beginning, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And we talk about when we had Gelzo on, we were talking about West Point. If you went to West Point in the 18 after Mexico for most part,
Yeah.
you were basically an engineer. It
Yeah.
wasn't like you were learning a lot of military stuff. And so a lot of these guys who went into the Civil War, they had to learn the fly too, even though they were
Yeah.
West Point. But there was a brotherhood there. And so, if you see a guy, a political general, and you see it now. I mean, people, Dan Sickles, you mentioned Dan
Yeah.
Sickles. He had his own issues, but you can't deny how smart he was. But he
Yeah.
wasn't. He was one of only one only non-West Pointer in that 7 corps commanders
Yeah.
at Gettysburg. So, admittedly, he moved his men up and that whole thing, and who knows, how true the whole background with that is. But he was very clearly pointed out he was not a West Point grad.
Yeah.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. And then Grant mentions that General Grant letters to Halleck was wondering if there was a middleman between them doing the attacks, and then he didn't realize it was Halleck himself doing it.
Yeah, I mean, he was a politician's politician, and he was.
Yeah.
I mean, they in politics, we've been talking about this a little while now. Politics is this whole thing. The whole thing is politics, and it's not simply just blue versus red fighting on lines. A lot of this, it's amazing when you start to read a lot of the non-war Civil War books. Look at you yawning. You hid that yawn very well.
No, sorry, geez.
Somebody was out at the brewery last night.
Oh,
That's your problem.
Too bad.
Oh, you weren't? Okay.
Had one beer. We each had one beer. It was.
Okay. Anyway, but that the politics is a huge part of it, and it's very understudied. And nobody wants to read about politics because people think it's boring. But
it's an important part of the war.
It's important. But if you read Liz Varen's book, you realize how important politics was with Longstreet. And I'm telling you right now, you cannot understand James Longstreet if you don't understand his post-war politics, because that explains the Lee thing, that explains everything with Jubal Early, everything with Pickett. So much is because of the politics, and if you don't read that and don't get into it, I don't. When speaking of Longstreet, I think if you don't read the Varen book, you're really missing the boat, because it opens up and explains so much about him during the war. That came out afterwards, and
and that's the thing, is some of these guys' reputation, or how we see them now, the narrative was kind of put together, post Civil War. It's not happening in real time during the war, it's happening after the war. Or even like it doesn't happen, like the stuff with Longstreet, a lot of it didn't happen right
Well,
after the
that's the
Battle of
thing too.
Gettysburg,
Is if you read historians, guys like Bob Crick, for example, and
Yeah.
you read some of the more I guess they're still contemporaries. The books have been around for a while, but it makes it sound like the Lee Longstreet feud happened in real time. That didn't come out till after he became a Republican.
Yeah.
He went to New Orleans and he began to hire freed blacks to be part of his militia. Then everything flipped on Longstreet and all the stuff came out. Lee, Lee was dead for most of it,
Yeah.
most of that stuff. So it was an easy. He wasn't. No one's going to pick on Lee because it was Lee and he was dead. But the reality was, it's a fascinating study, and it really gets you into the inside of someone like that. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
good books about Longstreet specifically, but most of the Longstreet books I've read get it wrong about the Lee thing.
Yeah.
They think it was like the movie, and they just hate each other. Laugh at it.
Goes to Sickles' leg is on here. He said, "Politics and I have nothing to do with each other. I'm the savior of Gettysburg, ask Longstreet.
That is true. That is true.
The whole battlefield is my monument."
And Sickles, and again, you see the political stuff that hit him afterwards. You still see it today.
Mhm.
You still get the whole law. Sickles defied orders, and he was twisting his mustache. How can I screw me today? How can I
Yeah.
screw the? And that's one of those things where it takes a lot to unlearn something,
Yeah.
right?
It gets into this whole like you have to read um more than one book. Just like, there was a really, really great interview with Angie Atchison on addressing Gettysburg regarding the licensed battlefield guide exam that's going to be held in December of this year. And I found it, I'm not taking the exam. I have no desire to be a guide at all. But I found it interesting to listen to because they're talking about the process of it. And just that, you have to get outside of studying just Gettysburg. And you have to look not just at the whole campaign, but you have to look at the pre-war and the post-war, what is happening too, and why is it happening? And that's just like, you have to, and you can apply that to any battle, like we all get pigeonholed into one battle. For a long time, I was just into Chickamauga and the Western Theater. And then I got back into the Eastern Theater when I met you. And you do like studying both theaters is so interesting because they're so different from each other, but they factor into each other, especially when you get into 1864 and you get into the March to the Sea, because Sherman is doing stuff on that march, like destroying the railways. And because he's doing that, Lee is not able to get that ammo that he needs or the supplies. It's a lot harder for him to do that. Now it's a slow effect at first, but then it really
Right.
starts, kind of steamrolling. But the whole like, just I would encourage, even if you're not interested in the guide exam, to listen to that interview because it's just really, it's interesting how they, what the whole process is and what you need to do as a guide as well.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is I think I haven't listened to Angie's interview. Admittedly, I haven't listened to that one yet. I'll get around to it at some point. But yeah, how can you possibly give tours to teach people about the war if you don't know how they got there?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like you could teach somebody about the World Series, but the regular season means something too, how to get
Yeah.
there, right? And how it leads up to that. And I think a lot of people, and we know a lot of people who their Civil War is July 1st to July 3rd. That they study it, and there's nothing wrong with it, but that they're Gettysburg Central people. But you have to know, and we just don't mean Second Winchester. We don't just mean that, but
Yeah.
we mean going all the way back to the Maryland campaign.
Yeah.
You can't understand Gettysburg if you don't really, really know the Maryland campaign
Hmm.
and understand the ramifications left after the Peninsula campaign. It all goes back. If you're going to effectively be able to be a guide in any of these battlefields, you have to know the whole thing because everything plays into it.
Yeah.
It's these battles are not fought in a vacuum, and you have to know the mindset and the politics behind
Yeah.
a lot of these guys, why these guys did what they did, right? You have
Hmm.
to know the mindset of a Richard Ewell, right? You have to understand that his success he had at Second Winchester, how he played that into going towards Harrisburg, eventually going back to Gettysburg, and it plays into that whole the Cemetery Hill, Culp's
Yeah.
Hill, take that hill narrative. Why he made the decisions he did, and why, and it wasn't just that. It was Lee's background, how Lee gave orders,
Mhm.
how he expected his generals to basically interpret those orders, and also what was Lee's intentions,
Mhm.
right? It was supplies. And he would have loved to have gone into Pennsylvania and just stayed there
Yeah.
and just stayed there as long as he possibly could. Which is why when people really get into the Pipe Creek plan, the flaw in Meade's plan is it assumed that Lee was going to attack him.
Yeah.
Why would Lee attack him? If you have your defense set up on that Maryland Pipe Creek, and your job is to get supplies and get it back down to back into the
Yeah.
valley and back down to Virginia. Hey, if he's not going to leave, he's going to leave me alone. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Mhm.
Eventually, he was going to have to attack him.
Yeah.
And that's why the whole we're going to fight a defensive campaign, blah, 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 because he knew eventually he was going to be attacked. But he didn't seem to be too motivated. The narrative is he was going to go into Pennsylvania, and he was going to defeat the Union Army and end the war. Well, sure, but he was going to get supplies and fight defensively to
The
do it.
shopping cart.
Yeah. Right, but it's true though. And so, but you got to understand the whole picture, and that's the thing. And especially this exam, when they haven't done it in a while, and there's going to be a bunch of people doing it, they're going to weed people out pretty quickly,
Yeah.
very, very quickly, because you really have to be able to speak very well to everything. The Western
Yes.
Theater, the Trans-Mississippi Theater, the pre, the post, the ramifications, the post-war, the politics. So yeah, so hopefully people do well with it. I think a
Yeah.
lot of we have some friends who are taking it, and I
Mhm.
think that hopefully
I
they'll do
just found
well.
out one of my friends, she messaged me this morning and she mentioned she was going to take it. And I was like, wow, go for it. Good for you. Like I think she's close to retirement and she'd be really good at it too. Like, and that's really,
But we tell you, if people who take it and hopefully they take it and they do well and they pass and all that, but you still got to remain open, have an open mind to it.
yep.
You can't be of the mindset where you're going to do tours and you're going to dictate your idea of the truth and not be open, right? And that's a big thing too. And so if you make it to the point, that where you're giving tours, hopefully, because I mean myself and you and everybody else, people's opinions of things do change over time.
Yeah, mine has changed on a few different people over time. Just want to say good morning to Patrick and Allie K is on here too.
Oh, hey, how are you? But I think it's cool they're doing it, and we'll see when they're doing the next one. After that, we'll see how that
Yeah.
one goes.
I just think
But
that the whole interview was a good reminder, especially for me to kind of like just remember to always be like constantly learning and reading and looking at sources and not get pigeonholed into like, one idea about something and always be open-minded to, even if it doesn't change your opinion, if it makes you think on the subject a little bit more and say, hi, I never thought of it that way. It was just a good reminder to keep reading read as much as you can. And yes, you can still have that favorite battle or that favorite person to study. But it's interesting to kind of get out of that too and understand, you know, what else is going on. Like, Ryan mentions if you don't understand, the battle that Sickles and others are fighting at Chancellorsville, you can't understand, what's going on at Gettysburg. Because some of what happens at Chancellorsville is factoring into their heads. Howard especially, I think,
well,
is,
the
you know,
politics of it all,
yeah,
right? Darius Couch quits.
yeah,
He's going to be taking over the defense of Pennsylvania, the Department of the Shop of Susquehanna,
yeah,
and you're going to have guys like Winfield Scott Hancock move up. You're going to have people move in and out. Obviously, Meade's going to take over from the Fifth Corps,
yeah,
and this is going to happen all in real time. But understand, a lot of these generals, I don't want to say don't like each other, but they're on polar opposites politically from each
yeah,
other. And this is specifically an issue because they go against what the White House wants in a lot of cases.
yeah.
Reynolds, Hancock, Sykes, especially.
Mhm.
Even Sickles. I mean, these people were not people who were very fond of the emancipation thing.
No,
They wanted to fight for the Union, and there's a reason why Reynolds turned it down, and it was politics
yep,
because he wanted nothing to do with it because he knew, and Meade found out this later. Any success you had was Lincoln's.
yeah,
Any failure you had was yours. People don't talk about Halleck screwing Burnside for the pontoons at Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
All you hear about is Burnside losing badly. It's Teflon,
Yeah.
right? The blame game was important because it was politics.
Yeah. And a lot of John, if you don't know that Buster didn't exist before the battle, you won't know he didn't exist during the battle.
Well, John will be doing his Buster
I'm
tour.
still convinced that it was his horse.
What we need to do is set up a bar in Gettysburg called Buster's, have an Irish
Well, I think
bar.
that's Gentili's retirement dream.
I think he should. I think he should. He's short enough to be a leprechaun too, so it'll work out perfectly.
Oh
you know.
Goes to Sickles Lake mentions the path to Gettysburg, the path to Gettysburg, and the path from Gettysburg is demarcation line in the Union War. Vicksburg falling was the death knell of the South, and Gettysburg was a change of tactics for the Union.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of cases it was.
Yeah.
You can make a case for any of these battles. I mean, politically, Gettysburg was gigantic. Militarily, Vicksburg was much more
Oh
important.
yeah,
But
I always say like the West is kind of where a lot of the I don't want to say important victories because that's not what I mean, but there's a lot of strategy going into what has happened to help break the South.
we said it before. The Eastern Theater is the quarterbacks and the receivers. The Western Theater is the linemen, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting and the grunt work took place in the West. Not that it didn't happen in the East too, but because you were closer to Washington, you were much more, you had much more spotlight on you.
Yeah.
So you got more credit and more blame for things than in the West.
Yeah.
I mean, it took 6 times to take Vicksburg for Grant, so he
Wasn't
failed
it
a bunch.
9?
It depends. I mean, there's a whole bunch of little
6
things.
times 9 months.
Right, but you have the DeSoto Canal failure, but the genesis of that came from Island Number 10 when it did work. So you can see how the things they did in the bigger battles were results of the smaller battles, the things that did work. But the Western Theater, it's all about slowly trudging way down that river and cutting the Confederacy off. And then once you got to the Overland Campaign, it was a big whirlpool. Everything was spinning. You had all the armies moving basically in a clockwise circle to ultimately get to Virginia and push it out. And that was the brilliance of Grant.
Yeah,
because he was able to take the West, take Atlanta, and then once he did that, begin to kind of really tighten the noose on Lee, which was really what the guy they really wanted was Lee.
Yeah,
everything else that was taking place, Army of Tennessee and stuff like that, they were formidable, but they knew once Lee went down, that was the end.
That was the end of it. Just I'll put this out here. I don't know if you know this, Darren, but maybe someone in the chat does. Ryan's wondering if there's any good books that touch or talk about Sykes. He's a bit of an empty space in the Corps Commander bio space.
I can't think of off the top of my head, to be honest, Ryan. Hopefully
Bjorn comes on here.
Jumps on, because he'll write off 5 or 6 books. But Sykes is a guy, again, he is somebody who, and we've used this label a lot, but he's one of the more underrated incompetents in the Union Army, especially when you get to Bristow Station, how he tripped on his dick that day, right? And he doesn't get a lot of negative credit for a lot of different things. But I don't know the book. I know he doesn't have a statue at Gettysburg.
No.
He's one of only a couple who don't. But he's somebody who, he takes command of the 5th Corps right once Meade gets promoted, and he does a pretty good job at Gettysburg. But he also had some pretty good subordinates.
Yeah,
guys like Strong Vincent, guys like that were really, really good. But I don't know the book, so hopefully he jumps on. We can figure that out, because but he's an interesting guy. But at the end of the day, I think there's probably more negative than positive when you look at his wartime anyway.
Yeah. And,
he's like a Pleasanton in the infantry.
Oh God, Pleasanton, most punchable face in the Union
Army. Kind of.
Grant asked, did we ever learn why Armistead hit early with a plate, and if they still had bad feelings between them later?
I don't think there was any bad feelings. And it's a great question about why they did it. None of them really talked about it. Armistead was despite what the movie says, he didn't get all weepy thinking about
he was grumpy.
He was a not a good personality, miserable, grumpy, but he was a military guy.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows what it might have been. Yeah, but he did do it. But that's who might know the answer to that is Tom McMillan.
Yeah, or even Wayne Motts.
Wayne probably would too. But
Wayne Motts or Tom McMillan.
They never really talk about it though, of why. It might have just been you stepped on my foot and gym class.
Or it might have just been like it's kind of like there was a like Howard got beat up at West Point, and it was because of the him defending African Americans.
Well, we know that story because he
Yeah,
talks about it.
but he didn't admit to it for a lot of years, and when he like he gets knocked out, I think, and then when he comes to in the hospital, it's Lee
It's Lee.
that's there checking on him to make sure he's okay. And whoever it was that he got in a fight with, he didn't speak to them again for a long time. The person actually came up to him and said, because of how you feel about this, I can't actually
I thought it was SD Lee who he
I think it
with.
was well, he and SD Lee had a falling out post-war because SD Lee wanted the pardon. And Howard was like, I'm in a really awkward position with this.
Right.
To do this for you. And SD Lee was like, well, I'm not going to talk to you for a while. And then it was a mutual friend that what?
Just the way you put it. Well, I'm not going to talk to you for a while.
Well, that was pretty much it. And Howard
Howard
never understood why. And then Howard was back at Gettysburg one time. He went there quite a bit just to, tour around. And I think he went out to Chickamauga and stuff too. But he asked about SD Lee, and this person said, I'll check for you. And whoever this person was, they reconciled. And SD Lee wrote him this letter just apologizing and saying, we need to just kind of bury the hatchet on this. And SD Lee passed away 2 years later. Mm-hmm. So they lost all those years. And I think they both, especially SD Lee, regretted it, whatever it was. But yeah, and he was like, Howard was really good friends. He was like, he helped Jeb Stuart with math.
Yeah.
At West Point. Which is really the friendships these guys have, all of them. Like, it's really interesting. And it's interesting to see certain names pop up when Howard's writing to his wife. He always mentions Hardy when he's in the Western Theater because they were all.
And that's the thing is because of the movies and books, people tend to focus on the friendship specifically of Armistead Hancock, right? Because the movie, why wouldn't they? But there's so many of odd couple friendships, right? And there's a bunch of them. Longstreet Sickles.
Yeah, that's a hilarious friendship.
But there's a lot of them, and a lot of these go pre-war, and they were friends, and it was hard for a lot of them. But a lot of them, they had their rivalries, especially from school. Oh, yeah. You had some rich people, and you had some not so rich people, and there was classes between the two at West Point, and there was so much that went into it. But when you get to see how they would fight against each other on certain things, you can almost imagine the thoughts of what it must have been like.
Yeah.
When you know you're going against a division of somebody that you went to school with, and you get to know their tendencies a little bit, probably to a point, but it's just very unique in American history.
Yeah. Well, Ezra Church, Howard had no idea who he was fighting, that it was SD Lee, until after.
Yeah.
Because SD Lee had come in so quickly that they had no clue who they were fighting, and it was afterwards he found out it was SD Lee.
Yeah. No, and Ezra Church is once you get into that Atlanta campaign, you start seeing those battles, and then that's famous story where Howard's telling Sherman, "No, I'm going to watch my flanks." Well, why?
Yeah.
Well, because I know. Trust me.
Trust me, I've seen this before.
I have some history in this, and he does. And
Sherman's like, "Well, you do, you dude." And
he's like, whatever. He's like, you seems crazy, but you knock yourself out.
And then it turned out he was.
And so he definitely learned, Yeah. But again, when you study these people individually, and you can, especially, you want to get to know them, because no one really knows any of these people. I mean, I've always said before, if you went back in time and you met one of these Civil War generals, you probably come away mortified, miserable, because these are alpha dog dudes who are tunnel vision people. They're not the type of people you want to hang out and have a drink with.
They're definitely different on the battlefield than they are in the letters. I know, like, our friend Jacob, who likes to study Bragg, like, Bragg is a very different person to his wife.
Yeah.
Like,
and I think, what's funny is, speaking of your boy Howard there, you get to study these people, and you start to realize how much historical memory has really poisoned them. And you see a lot. You see mention Wallace, obviously, but Howard. There's so much stuff that goes into that. Even Jeb Stuart, with his being late. There's so much misconception and mistruth. Obviously, McClellan's another one. where people tend to focus on one aspect and just
Yeah.
blow it up, and it becomes fact to the point where if you try to defend any of these people get all bent out of shape. Well,
Oh yeah, they take offense to it. And it's like I'm not, it's like when we've been called McClellan apologists before because we are kind of like, maybe look at McClellan this way and don't, that narrative, you know, um, that narrative of that Sears has put out about McClellan has basically other authors have taken that and run with it. Ryan asked, I apologize. Our neighbor decided to mow the lawn, like do some yard work, whatever. Um, Ryan asked, isn't there a brief moment in Mexico where McClellan, Jackson, and Magruder are working to command different elements of the same battery?
yeah, it's true. John Magruder, we talked a little bit about him when we did Yorktown. He's somebody who, despite probably being the second highest rank Confederate general when the Peninsula was going on, gets no credit for anything.
Yeah,
He holds Yorktown, but yeah, they were all friends back in the war.
yeah.
This is going back when Stonewall, back when he got his Masonic degrees,
Hmm.
right, in
Oh, did he get them in
Mexico.
Mexico?
He got to Mexico, yeah.
Wow.
And so he at a field lodge. So it's fascinating when you look at some of the early war dynamics, right? Before
Yeah,
the pre-war dynamics of how these guys all knew each other. Because I mean, West Point was a small school, and there were very few. There's not a lot of army. There was no need for it really at that point. Really, you have Mexico,
yeah,
1840s. You got the Utah expedition in the 1850s. That's pretty much it for the most part. And then the war happens, and it turns into a volunteer army. Everything explodes, um, but again, the regulars versus the non-regulars would be would be a factor as the war went on. It
yeah,
goes into that politics again versus the West Pointers versus non-West
yeah,
Pointers. But
yeah.
a lot of most of these dudes all knew each other.
Oh yeah, they did. They knew who they were, and if they hadn't met each other, they knew of each other. Like Sherman had never met Joseph E. Johnston prior to the war. He didn't meet him in person until the surrender. But he knew of him, obviously, it's his opponent. But after that, they became quite good friends. MJ mentions many are closed-minded and can't handle being open to information that goes against their narrative. And that's, we've talked about that a lot. Sometimes people choose to pick one element of a person and hold on to that, and it clouds their judgment of how they see them, or they're like they only focus on a victory and they don't see the negative, or they only focus on one negative and they don't see all else that the person did. And admittedly, I used to be that way with Howard until, someone asked, how long have I been into Howard for? It's been a few years now, but I was very like much in the whole like, ha ha, he's not very good, whatever. And then um I started reading more about him and I realized, wow, this guy he's a very complex figure. He's very important post-war. Um, he's misunderstood in many ways. Like love reading the letters he wrote to his wife because, and he's got this reputation as being very religious. He's not very like his letters. He mentions, God bless you or whatever in the letters, but he doesn't go on and on for pages. He talks about what's happening in the army and all this. And you really get to see the human side when you read the letters. Same with
Yeah,
Meade in writing letters, and I used to not be a fan of Dan Sickles. And then I started reading more and I realized, wow, Sickles, like, I mean, I'm team Meade for the most part, but I am team Sickles now that I know more about what happened and
mm-hmm.
understand what happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important not to focus on one negative or one positive of an individual. You see that with people that study Grant. Um, they don't like to hear about his faults, you know.
No, I mean they all have their faults. They all do. Doesn't mean you got. I mean, doesn't mean you got to go out of your way to pick on the faults. But at the same time,
No.
you definitely. And a lot of it, I think it's mostly a social media thing. Although you know what? No, it goes back to the way before social media though. When you read some of these books, people have their favorites. People like their narratives. Every book that you've ever read has got someone putting a spin on it to try to
Yeah.
influence you one way or the other, even if it's subliminally. Um, but again, when you talk about some of the secondary guys like you mentioned John Magruder, right? Very real success at Yorktown, real success at Galveston, real good history overall, but he doesn't rise to that level for whatever reason. And the same thing on the Union side.
Mhm.
Guys like Wallace, right? We'll talk about him more in detail next week. Howard, I think, is probably a little bigger fish than probably Wallace is,
Oh yeah, yep,
right? But I think at the end of the day, um, he had obviously his detractors, and he
yep.
still has his detractors.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, the lazy retreating from Chancellorsville thing, that's a thing. And then he gets unfairly blamed at Gettysburg, which is just historically ridiculous. It just
yep,
is. But I think, that's why you study history. You
yep.
read it.
Reading the
I've
letters
I've
post
come
get
around. I've
like
come around on things. I've come around on guys like McClellan.
yep.
When if you
Me
really
too.
get in,
McClellan was a big one for me.
well, when you really read on McClellan, of course he had his
His
issues. But when you
ego, and yes, the letters to his wife are not like, yes, he's gossiping and backstabbing people like a teenage girl in high school, but we were never meant to read those letters. That's the thing to remember is this is what he's writing to his wife, and that's his
right,
sounding board.
yeah,
That's
that's
he's
true.
venting to her, you know. And yes, he's arrogant, but he's doing what we all do as humans. He's venting to somebody.
I mean, right, and then
Doesn't make it right, but
no, but there's no shame in it. There's nothing to be ashamed about that. But that's the reality. I mean, every one of these dudes. We were talking about Meade's letters.
mhm.
Meade wrote some letters to his wife Marguerite,
Yep.
which I think have been very well hidden from the mainstream.
Yes.
And it's why Gelso gets ripped because
Yep.
he talks about the letters.
Yep.
When after Gettysburg, he's basically writing saying maybe we should just make peace with these guys. Is this whole thing worth it?
Yep.
And it's blasphemy when you think about it, when you look back on it now. But you just because he writes a private letter, it doesn't mean that you can't talk about it. Doesn't mean he's
Yep.
right or wrong or indifferent. But I mean, simply talking about it doesn't make you anti anybody, right?
Yep.
I don't know.
And like Cisco mentions he should have ended his letters with burn after reading. And that's what Thomas did. Thomas was like, you burn my letters to his wife. And the more I study the Civil War, the more I want to, like, I mean, I love Thomas. He's awesome, but I have never read a biography about him and I really want to. But he gets mentioned by random people. Like Wallace saw him as one of the best generals. Howard saw him that way. These random generals are mentioning him as one of the best. And I think, I mean, Thomas has a good reputation now, but I think in the Civil War, he was like this, really good.
Thomas.
Yeah,
Well,
Thomas.
he was reputation being cautious.
Yeah, no, but he had a good reputation.
No, he did,
Yeah,
because he was almost the adult in the room a lot of times.
yeah,
I mean, you
and
saw that at Chickamauga, certainly. Even Chattanooga,
yeah,
in Missionary Ridge. I mean, he. There's not a lot of negative you could find on George Thomas anywhere.
no,
Um, and I think because he was a well thought out, well read, very brilliant type of general, and there's a
he's
lot of them
very
like that.
different from Grant, but he's still a very good. He's still a very good general, and like,
He was I mean he didn't get in front a lot, right? He was smart about it, but at the same point, when you look, I see Ryan's on here. You mentioned Phil Kearney,
yeah,
and the sky was the limit for Phil Kearney. And
oh
people,
yeah,
he's almost on that John Magruder level of people in the Civil War who don't really, not like people on this chat, but the average person. Well, maybe they've heard of him because they've heard of Kearney, New Jersey, right? And they
yeah,
drive by when they go to a Jet game, but they don't realize how good he was and how gigantic loss he was at Chantilly. And
yeah,
this is going back, this is post-war we're talking now too. And a lot of these guys were really robbed and took away from the Reconstruction part of the country, because of where they were. He gets killed with Stevens right there at Chantilly.
yeah,
And again, even Stevens was a big loss at that battle.
oh
But
yeah,
again, but that's what you're dealing with when you lose James Burbs McPherson in Atlanta,
oh,
right?
that
When you
was a
lose
huge one
Kearney at
too.
Chantilly.
Yeah,
On the Confederate side, you lose Albert City Johnson at Shiloh. Who knows how that changes stuff? So a lot of these times people get killed. It's not so much what they did and how they got killed; it's how their impact later was taken away and the impact they could have had. And that is the greatest what if with any of these battles, no
oh
question.
yeah, yeah. Carney is definitely he's the one that I think like, geez, what could he have been? Would he have been commander of the AOP? I think eventually he might have been. Um, just read some. So Ryan mentions that Hooker said Thomas was the best he served under, infinitely better than Sherman. That was pretty much Howard's conclusion too. That
The only people, ironically, who had anything bad to say about Thomas was who? Was Grant
Grant.
It was Halleck,
Yep.
right?
Oh, and Lincoln to some extent
And
too.
Lincoln, but Lincoln to a point, but he kind of pigeoned what they said. But it goes to show, even if you are someone who's thought of in the army of being almost, I don't want to say pristine, but almost, he didn't really make a lot of mistakes. He still wasn't trusted by guys like Grant
Because he's a Virginian.
and Blackjack Logan
Yep.
because he's Virginian.
Yep.
And so even with that, you have one strike against you, and that goes back to the politics again.
Yep. Yep. I love that one of my favorite Thomas stories is like when we went to the cemetery the National Cemetery, and they were like burying all of them after Chickamauga and Chattanooga, and that was what Thomas was tasked with. And someone was like, well, do we want to bury them by states? And Thomas is like, I'm tired of states' rights and mix
Tired
them
of
up.
states' rights, bury them together. And if you've been to the
Yep.
Chattanooga Cemetery, and that's a great cemetery. The victims of the general are buried there, and there's a whole bunch. And yeah, you see officers with privates and
Yep.
states with all mixed up. It's very unlike Gettysburg, and that's
Yep.
because of George
Yeah,
Thomas.
because he was like, I'm tired of states' rights, mix them up. And he also there was a moment in the Atlanta campaign, and I think it might have been after it was either after Kennesaw or Pickett's Mill. And it's him and Sherman. And Sherman says something like, oh yeah, well, we lost a few, but not as many, blah, blah, blah. And Thomas is like, if we keep having small battles where we're losing just a few, we're not going to have enough men
Yeah.
left. And he basically, like, Thomas was, as you said, the voice of reason. I think he's having to have come to Jesus chats with a few of these generals to basically be like, we
Well,
need
look at Sherman at Cheatham Hill,
yeah,
Kennesaw.
that's when he had the whole, if we keep having battles
When
like
he
this,
does that, I don't know, Davy. When
oh
that whole
no,
thing.
he
But I
becomes
mean,
Eeyore.
well, but again, you got to look at the big picture. She's like, Sherman, you're pretty good at the weaving and bobbing and flank hitting and forcing them back. You're not so good at the recklessly, fully fronting, exposing yourself, which nobody wants to see. And so, and Kennesaw exposed that again. And maybe we shouldn't attack up an open hill against an entrenched enemy. Maybe we shouldn't do that.
That have 3 levels of trenches.
Well, and so if you visit Kennesaw, and a lot of people here have, and you walk that grounds, and you see the breastworks, like we said before, they're real and they're spectacular. There's no question on Kennesaw. You actually wonder why that they would do it. And then when you find that unknown Union grave, and you realize how
Oh,
far that poor bastard made it,
yeah.
just to be shot and killed and buried, and he's still there, and they got a grave
Mhm.
marker for him. It's the Kennesaw that whole Atlantic thing. If you go to Pickett's Mill, and you go to Kennesaw, and you go to Dallas, and you go to Cold Farm, and you go to all these battlefields in that area, if you walk Pickett's Charge and you go, what the hell? You'll be floored when you visit these battlefields, because
Yeah.
to be the type of person to fight and walk those grounds and still keep going, it's a different world. It's just a different world. I think so many folks get kind of focused on the Antietam's and the Gettysburgs of
Yeah.
the world. But when you go to do you go to those Atlanta areas and you're fighting in the woods and you see some of this stuff? No thanks, man. No thanks.
Yeah,
Hard pass.
the ones that went from the east to the west, they especially noticed the difference. And I mean, all war is bloody. It's terrible. 1864 is a terrible, just for the casualties and all that. But they said, like, this is a nightmare. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. And, I'm saying this as a person who was at Antietam and Gettysburg, that, that's what Howard said. He's like, I was at Antietam and Gettysburg and I thought that was bad. Pickett's Mill was a nightmare. That he just said it's a nightmare. Like,
It's just a bad ground. It's just a bad
yeah,
place to fight.
yeah,
It's a great place to defend, but it's a horrible place to fight
yeah,
offensively, and that's the truth of it. Um, but so when you start to look at some of the flaws of these guys, Howard, was screwed up at Pickett's Mill. What was he think? Well, you kind of don't have a choice either. There's that
yeah.
Sherman wants you to hit the Confederate right of the flank. Um, and if the right of the flank is in the middle of a woods and a valley and a gorge, well, that's where you got to do it.
Yep. And then he
So,
sends that order back and he's like, I think they're here.
and people talk about that, where it's like, well, he didn't know where the hell he was. It's because the visibility was
It's
you've been there.
terrible.
It's like 2 feet. You're walking literally in a forest,
Yeah.
and you can't see shit. You
No,
can't see anything.
you
So
can't,
it's like,
it's so just, and it's pretty much how it looked during the battle. Goes to Sickles Lake said the mystery of Thomas is because he didn't want people digging in his personal life, and Thomas being a Virginian was the main issue. And then Frank said Thomas' family had bad things to say about him and they had turned his portraits away.
Yeah.
Ryan mentioned C.F. Smith, who we've been talking about in reference to Wallace, who's dead
Right.
before Shiloh, and Grant and Sherman thought he'd have ended up in charge, and Kearney wanted Smith to replace McClellan, and C.F. Smith was a huge loss.
He was early. I mean, he was
Yeah,
really early, and so people don't really know C.F. Smith because he was really early. Same with Felix Zollicoffer on the Confederate side, right? He
yeah,
was an early loss on the Confederate side. So a lot of these guys who people don't really know as these A-listers, right?
yeah,
It's because they were killed so early. People know Johnson because the whole story in Los
no,
Angeles, and he
yeah,
was. But I mean, for the most part, a lot of these dudes went down early and really um, robbed their respective sides of what could have been,
yeah,
right?
yeah. C.F.
Right,
Smith was right. C.F.
right.
Smith was a huge loss. Frank said, I bet Hood also had bad things to say about Thomas after Nashville.
Well, yeah, that whole thing. But I mean, the thing about Nashville is it's too bad because there's not a lot of Nashville left as far as the battlefield. It's
Yeah,
mostly been taken over by Tootsies and Printers Alley and
Tootsies.
bars and Kenny Chesney.
Sounds like a
But
place EBD would have liked.
oh, I probably would have. But I mean, there is still some stuff there. You can still do some tours there. But again, you're fighting against a really entrenched position in the snow and ice with an army of Tennessee, which has been bruised at Spring Hill and especially
Yeah.
Franklin. And you give Hood credit for he kept going, whether it's the smartest idea or not. But um, I bet you that Grant and Lincoln and Halleck were okay with keeping Thomas there in hindsight. Because don't forget, Grant was on his way to take over.
Oh yeah. He
He
sent
was
him blackjack.
he was sitting with a Southwest airline ticket in the terminal waiting to fly to Nashville to take over
Was
that
he in
battle.
line A, B, or
You know,
C?
yeah, exactly. It's probably got a C-TAC, C-50, for sit in the
And you
friggin'
have to
wing,
have the
right?
thousand, like the
You know,
50% of the plane is boarding before you because they're special.
yeah. Him and Blackjack are going to take over in
Yeah.
Nashville, and they never did, and it's probably good that he did. But I don't think Thomas gets enough credit. I think
No.
historically, I mean, people know who he is, but again, he also died young. And that's the other thing. He didn't have
Yeah.
it. He didn't have leave letters behind because he told his wife to clear his history cache.
Yeah.
Probably too much red tube for him, and he ended up not living long enough to be able to write memoirs later.
Yeah.
There's a book called Education and Violence by Francis McKinney, which is a really good bio of George Thomas. And it's probably the only one I can think of that's really, really good. But there's not much with him.
No.
He's one of those blind spots in history where there's just not that champion who's going to take the cause and write and be that
Yeah.
Elizabeth Varron with Longstreet, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
or be Atomic Millen with Armistead. That's so if you're going to write a book, someone like that will be a good one because he's
Oh yeah.
already a mainstream guy with not a lot of books about him.
Yeah. Yeah. Grant wants to know, he said, like, we know Howard is Mary's favorite, but who's your favorite? He wants to know who's your favorite, if
I
you
don't
have
really
one.
have a favorite general, to be honest. I mean, I like colonels. I find myself gravitating towards Charles Tilden from the 16th Maine. I gravitate towards Edward Cross of the 5th New Hampshire and David Ireland from the 137th New York. That's who I tend to like. The generals, I don't. I mean, I don't really have one, to be honest. I guess I think it's more I tend to focus on specific people in their stories, and if they happen to
Mhm.
make a general, great. But if they don't, but I'd say those three are my guys.
Yeah.
I like your boy
MJ
Howard. I like
Deeran's
Howard.
favorite is Hancock.
Speaking of Hancock, yesterday was free donut day, Mary. I don't know if you know that
Yeah, I
because
do.
you didn't get me a donut, and I'm not happy about that.
I know.
No, but truthfully, Hancock has got a great story. He's
Yeah.
somebody who I think is absolutely worth studying. Even on the Confederate side, I love Patrick Claiborne.
Same.
I mean, I would say
Claiborne and Granberry for me on the Confederate
if there
side.
is a general overall umbrella term general for me, it probably would be Patrick Claiborne. But I think for the most part, I gravitate towards those three colonels. I think those are my favorites.
Yeah. Ryan said I need to win the lottery so I can retire and write a new Hooker bio.
Well, there you go. Right.
Yep. No, I think like on the Confederate side for me, it would be Patrick Claiborne, Mosby,
See,
Grant,
Mosby's another one.
Granbury.
And the thing about it is, there's so many, but I mean, to have a specific favorite is just
I guess there's ones I enjoy studying. Like, I mean, I really enjoy Hiram Granbury's story. I really,
there are a lot of
John
these
Brown
dudes.
Gordon's interesting.
with
Yeah.
really good stories to tell. And a lot of it is the background. I love Cross's background. I love Ireland's background. Tilden's got a great story at Gettysburg, and the thing about Tilden is he's somebody who is kind of just a baller. He gets fights at Gettysburg. The 16th Maine creates that salient to save John Cleveland Robinson's division. Gets captured, goes to Libby, escapes in the Rhodes Tunnel, not Rhodes Clown, Mary, tunnel, and then he gets captured again at Petersburg, escapes again. So he's got a cool type of story, and he's a New Englander too, so it's easy to resonate towards people like that. But I think everyone's worth studying. Even the people you don't like are worth studying. I mean,
Oh yeah.
someone like John Brown Gordon, who I'm not going to be, having tea with anytime soon.
No.
But at the same time, I love his story. He's a fascinating study.
Oh yeah.
But we know a lot of people who will just close-mindedly refuse to study people.
Yeah, because I think because it makes them uncomfortable. Or like I've said, I've said before that I've, read some of Gordon's memoirs and people are like, oh, you got to take it with a grain of salt. I'm like, I'm well aware of that, just like any other memoir.
Well, my entry drug to the American Civil War was John Wilkes Booth. Yeah. Admittedly, and I got books upon books, and so I don't consider myself a Booth fan, but I study a lot of that era because you have to understand, but again, that's kind of how it is,
Yeah, Frank just reminded me of Banbury.
Banbury.
If you find yourself in Ringgold Gap, go to obviously go to the Claiborne statue that's there. Also visit the 137th New York Monument is there with David Ireland and his guys when they fought against Claiborne. But also go down to, I think it's the town hall, find the flag of Hardee and Claiborne's division, the full moon on it. And there's all these patio stones leading up to it. And it must have been a year-end budget thing and they couldn't replace it. But Granbury's name is spelled Banbury and Govin's name is Groven.
Groven.
They sound like Muppets.
It's weird that especially in a very deep Confederate area like Ringgold, Georgia.
Banbury and Groven.
That's like spelling Lincoln with a K, like Lincoln Park, the band up here in the north in Illinois somewhere.
Can you imagine?
But it's good though. But when you study these people individually, and I did my cross thing in Gettysburg a few weeks ago, and what was fun about that was because you get to personify them and you get to go into their personality a little bit.
Yeah, you did a very good job, which MJ said as well.
Okay. And MJ was Cushman. She crushed it. It was Cushman, and you did well with Elizabeth Thorne. But you get to tell these stories of some of these lesser lights, right? These people who other people don't really know.
Yeah.
And I remember, I mentioned that he was part of the North Star Lodge number 8 in Lancaster, New Hampshire. We did a presentation, me, MJ, and Mary here, and there was another guy too. This guy Trevor from Gettysburg. Yeah. And someone afterwards said that his grandfather was a member of the North Star Lodge in Lancaster, so he never heard the story of the cross before, but he knew the lodge, which was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it was really cool to do. It was really cool.
You almost killed poor Roger in your presentation.
God. Idiot. Jeez.
Freaking stupid. But that's what's great. But what's great about the living history, and we're going to go down and MJ's doing her presentation on July 7th over at Unity Park. We'll go check that out, obviously. But you get to see people kind of talking about their passion, right? In first person. And so you can really put their personalities behind it. And she does a great job with that. A lot of people we know do. But it's fun. It's fun because you get to be them. You get to tell their stories. And you get to prep a little bit, and you gotta kind of it's like an actor getting into before a movie.
You have to get into their role.
Yeah. It was fun though. Good time.
Ryan mentions John J. Peck, who had a great Peninsula campaign and then stays behind to drive off Longstreet during the Suffolk campaign. He's an unheralded guy.
John Dix is another one. Speaking of Peninsula campaign, there's a lot of guys like that. John Dix is the reason why Beauregard didn't attack in concert with Lee in Gettysburg, and how that could have changed history. There's a lot of different people with that, but there's thousands upon thousands of people when you talk about this, and Lew Wallace is certainly one of them. Trying to get back to him, right? And so he's somebody who's very underappreciated. Like we said earlier when we started this a little while ago, he's someone who he's known for Ben-Hur. He's known for being part of probably the two most famous trials post-war, the Henry Wirz trial and the Lincoln Conspiracy trial. He had his fingers on all over those. and he certainly was. But then he has that religious kind of awakening, right?
Hmm.
And he writes that Ben-Hur book, and he puts Jesus as a character,
Yeah.
which was a ballsy thing to do back
Oh,
then.
it was. Yeah.
And so, but it ended up being very respected and very popular. Um, and the other thing he did, Fincheru, was he helped modern day movies, because what
Yeah.
happened was after he died, I think he died 1906, 1904, somewhere
Yeah.
around there. And he ended up, they made a movie of Ben-Hur
Yeah.
without permission about the Wallace family. So they sued, because back then you can make movies about anything, any book you
Yeah.
want, you just make a movie. So because of that, nowadays, when you make a movie about a book, you need to have permission
Mhm.
from the author, and that's all goes back to Lew Wallace and
Yeah.
Ben-Hur.
No, he was very, and he was like like I did a project about the Killer Angels, but you had to be able to access archives. So I had to be able to access the Shara archives that are housed in Florida. And if I wasn't able to access them, my second choice was going to be Ben-Hur, and Lew Wallace, and tell the story of that publication. Because they have the Lew Wallace the archives, I think, are in Indiana. It was going to cost money for me to access them and get what I needed. The
Here's a
Shara
fun
ones were
fact
free.
about Ben-Hur, Mary. The original transcripts of Ben-Hur still exist,
Yeah,
and it's written in purple ink.
interesting.
He had a purple ink pen. No one knows where he got it or how he got it, but it was written, it's
Wow.
purple ink. Just one of those stupid
There's
facts.
also, I think he
About
also
Hollywood.
wrote he also wrote into have a great weekend, MJ.
Oh,
He
I'm sure
also
we'll see you soon.
he also wrote into like the chariot race is a horse race he had with Grant.
Yeah, and he puts a lot of his personal stuff, because Grant was a fantastic horse rider.
Yeah.
He was, and he ended up getting into a race with him. And this is back before a lot of the stuff went bad between the two.
Yeah.
And he kind of had to let Grant win
Yeah.
because he was the boss. And so he kind of redoes that in the Ben-Hur story.
Yeah.
And so if you know the history, I would suggest seeing the movie instead of reading the book.
Yeah. The
The
book's a
book's
monster.
book's a little on the dry side,
Yeah.
but the movie's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, the
And
movie's really good.
there's been a handful of movies on it. But he puts his Civil War experiences into Ben-Hur. That horse race scene is absolutely from that scene,
Yeah.
and he was right. He was writing that book, and he right through his days in Turkey,
Yeah.
and he died of some kind of stomach cancer, and
Yeah.
he died relatively young too. I think he was still in his 60s when he
Yeah.
died.
Let me just look it up here
You
as
know,
I've got see when he died. 1905.
yeah. So but he died relatively. He has a really, it is property. He's got his study you can still visit, which is really cool. So
I
it's
would
like
love to
Joshua.
go see that.
It's like Joshua Chamberlain's Mantown that he has in
His
Brunswick.
man room.
And he wrote Ben-Hur for the most part under this tree, sitting on a bench in his property, and the tree is gone, but there's a plaque that shows that this is what the tree was.
Oh, there's a statue of him in the US Capitol.
That's true. He's one of the two Indiana statues. The other, of course, being Larry Bird.
Yeah. He died of atrophic gastritis at 77 years old.
Yeah. Okay. I guess he was older than I thought he was. I thought he was in his 60s, but that's pretty cool. But it's interesting though when you study these guys as people, because you can see their positives and their negatives.
Yeah.
But Lew Wallace is just another guy who unfortunately, for better for worse, the historical memory focused on the negative because of how stuff was written about him after the war, and that's unfortunate, because
Yeah.
he's somebody who should be heralded and held to a higher regard. I disagree with a lot of the stuff he did, especially with the Lincoln conspiracy trial, because I think he was a little over the top with that.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, his military career and his ambassador career is up there with the best. It really is.
Yeah.
And what a shame it was that he was put in the doghouse for all those years.
Yeah.
And how much he could have been more impactful during the war, especially in the Western theater.
Yeah.
But he saved Cincinnati.
Yep.
And you know what else he did, Mary? He was before the Emancipation Proclamation, he brought in blacks from Cincinnati to help with the army. Now they were more engineers, but what they did was they basically built a bridge. If you know Cincinnati, there's a town right across the river called Covington, Kentucky, which has got some great whiskey bars and Main Straws, by the way, if you bet. But he helped build that, and he was despite the fact that Cincinnati was a kind of a racist town.
Yeah.
If you saw the movie 42 with Jackie Robinson, you realize how
Oh,
racist it was.
yep.
Um, but he brought in, you know, African American freemen to help them build that bridge and help really build a defense. They took down about 2,000 acres worth of trees in Covington, Kentucky. So the Confederates couldn't attack them because they saw the open ground in front of them and they couldn't attack it because it was too many men. So he really saved Cincinnati. He really
Yeah.
did. I mean,
Yeah.
people from Cincinnati realize that, but otherwise, historically, people don't really
Yeah. He's
understand this,
kind
how
of just
impactful he was.
obscure. Grant asked, is he more famous for the book or the war?
Oh, it's up in the book.
Yeah.
There's no question. The book was probably
It was the best-selling book. Like it
it was the
surpassed the
best.
Bible.
It surpassed the Bibles. It was the most popular book written up until Gone with the Wind, which
Yeah.
came years later. That he was a rock star as an author, absolute rock star. But I think most people see him as the writer of Ben-Hur. Oh, by the way, he was a Civil War guy too.
Yeah.
That's how most people see him in the non-Civil
Yeah.
War
I
world.
learned of him first through the movie because it was one of my mother's favorite movies.
And he was also an artist because
Yeah.
he spent a lot of his time in the Lincoln trial drawing pictures. So
Yeah.
a lot of the Lincoln conspiracy pictures you see of the actual trial are Lew Wallace's pictures. They look like those courtroom pictures that
Yeah.
you just draw. Why he wasn't paying attention shows his mindset of the war. Of the trial,
Shows
by
how
the
much
way.
he cared.
Yeah, but he was someone who was very, very creative, and it was all because that chance meeting he had, you know, but with the agnostics to do that, and it really opened him up. But he
Yeah.
never forgot his Masonic values, and if you see his gravestone, it's got a lot of Masonic stuff on there, which
That's
is pretty
cool. I definitely want to
Yeah.
get there. Now we have I mean, Jay Price lives in Indiana, so we need to go see her, but like
Yeah, absolutely.
he's buried in Crawfordsville. And I'd love to go to the archives in his home there too, because he's just kind of this, I don't know, finding out about him when I was like 7 years old watching Ben-Hur and then finding out who he was, like, you know, what he had done, that he's this general is pretty cool.
Right.
And we've been wanting to record an episode about him for a while. And he's going to be like one of, I don't know, I've lost count of how many generals episodes we've done. We've done them on both sides. We talk about them both sides.
Well, you got to do both sides.
Yeah.
I mean, you doesn't mean you got to appreciate or I mean whatever. I mean, I've said this many times. There's two teams on the field here.
Yeah.
You know, and you could just because you're a Southern guy who supports the South or a Northern guy who supports the North, you got to study the other side because the best way you can understand yourself is by studying your emissary or the opposite, right? Adversary, I mean. And so that's what's interesting about it. And so it's really cool. It really is.
Morning, Ski.
What's up, Ski? What's happening? We haven't seen Ski in a while. We got to catch up with him soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then Grant asked, doesn't the plot of Ben-Hur mirror some of Wallace's life? Yep.
A little bit. I mean,
the friendship he has, the falling out is because he's got that one friend he has the falling out with, the Roman guy. That is basically what happened to him in the Civil War. That's kind of how he dealt with it.
The thing about Wallace was he did almost everything right for the most part. But what he did was unpopular, and the people who had problems with him thought that he wasn't capable enough because he wasn't a West Pointer to make those decisions. Mm-hmm. He arguably could have saved Memphis. Arguably.
Yeah.
He certainly, I don't want to say was a huge instrumental part to winning Shiloh, but he kind of was. He certainly wasn't to blame for it. Obviously, Monocacy, we've talked a million times about it. He's an absolute hero, Monocacy. But there's so many things he did. I mean, even going back to the Stone Ages of the Civil War, Battle of Romney.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a baller move to do that. And he was somebody who was like, well, I'm going to go hit these guys. But if you study Shiloh and really study Shiloh, and you talk like Tim Smith, Western Theater Tim Smith, the writer, he's a huge fan of Lew Wallace because he understands how impactful he was and how much he gets blamed badly for Shiloh because of the Halleck stuff that came afterwards, and how it just stuck, you know.
Yeah. And say, Cisco. So in the chariot race, was Charlton Heston supposed to be Grant? No, Charlton Heston is supposed to be. That's Wallace. If Wallace turns it into him winning the race against Grant. Grant is Grant is the friend he has the falling out with.
If you watch that movie closely, you'll notice one of the guys has a wristwatch.
Yeah.
And also, there's a guy in the background with a three-piece suit, a modern suit. It's like the historical inaccuracies. But yeah, but Charlton Heston was Wallace.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, people assume that movie is of Roman Empire. It's really a movie, a Jesus movie, if you
Yeah.
really think about it.
Yeah,
It
it's a
was
religious
him.
movie.
It was him having that religious awakening he had, and because he was not a religious fella, he was not Howard,
No.
right? And he had his questions about everything. And so when um, he ended up running into that situation there. He was basically someone who really he was someone who really had an issue with questions he had, and so that's what was kind of cool about it. He wrote a book basically based on a bet, which is and but it changed his whole religious awakening around. That's kind of what's
Yeah.
kind of cool about it.
Oh, here's the thing that we are going to talk about. Sickles Leg mentions, let's not forget Lou Semi betrayed Billy the Kid.
All right, so we got to talk about that. We didn't
Yeah.
mention that before. We got to talk about this. So when you look at the Billy the Kid thing, one of the most historically, I don't want to say inaccurate, because I don't want to insult anybody
He
here.
mentions the Young Guns movie.
Okay, Young Guns did more damage to Lou Wallace than probably Grant did or Halleck did. Here's the thing. So you have a situation where Lou Wallace ends up in Mexico, in New Mexico, to deal with that Lincoln County war thing, right? So one of the witnesses to a murder was Billy the Kid, and they decided, okay, Billy, we know you've killed a bunch of guys, but we want you to be one of our witnesses. So if you sign up and you give state's witness, we're going to pardon you. This is Wallace now, and Billy's like, okay, fine. And there's actually, you can see the actual letters between the two,
Mhm.
and he agrees to do it, but then the sheriff or the governor, I guess it would be, says, I'm not giving this guy a pardon. I don't care what the deal you made with him.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, Billy the Kid, William Bonney, he comes in, he turns himself in, he's sitting in jail. He finds out that he's not getting the pardon. So he breaks out of jail. He kills two deputies on his way out. And now he's a fugitive who's killed law enforcement. So they went and caught him, and ultimately it was Wallace who signed his death certificate.
Yeah.
Because of what happened. But people take that to think that he screwed Billy the Kid. He went against Billy the Kid. And I think people look at Billy the Kid the way they look at Emilio Estevez. Have you seen Young Guns?
Billy the Kid is
This
not a fun-loving individual.
Young Guns is a good movie, but there are a lot of people who have a really weird anti-Wallace fascination about Billy the Kid. And it's just historically wrong.
Mhm.
He made a deal with him that was overturned.
Yeah.
But when you break out of jail and kill two guys, two law enforcement, it's kind of tough to walk that back, and he had no choice at that point.
Yeah.
But that's the Billy the Kid thing, and that's so his story again, pre, during, and post war, is fascinating because he has his fingers in everything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, when I found, like, the judge is saying to Wallace, you shouldn't have done this. Like, this goes back to Wallace just, again, not following orders, he's doing what he's done his whole life. He's like, well, I'm just going to do what I want to do here. And then the judge was like, yeah, buddy, you shouldn't have done that. And then, so, I mean, I don't understand that whole part of it either. Ghost of Sickles Leg, Young Guns is canon. How dare you? Laughing.
I do like Young Guns. The movie's really entertaining.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the most accurate thing in the world, but I mean, but it's interesting. But again, it's one of those situations where there's a William Bonney world of fans, like there is a Jesse James ones. And Jesse James is one of the worst killers ever freaking walked the earth.
Yeah.
He's one of Bloody Bill Anderson's minions.
Yeah.
Right? Who killed Union soldiers when they got off trains.
Yeah.
On their leave, just killed them. But I don't blame Wallace for that, because what's he supposed to do at that point?
Mm-hmm.
He has no choice. But again, but the narrative is that he lured him in to pardon him and then killed him.
Yeah.
Which is just not true. It's just not true.
No, that's not, like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is happening there. And I mean, yes, Lou Wallace is not perfect, but I think I don't really understand the hatred towards him for that one thing.
Well, because it's based on
Yeah.
sheer historically inaccuracy. It's just
Yeah.
wrong. But both movies are good. I don't think they made a Young Guns
Young
too.
Guns too. Yeah, the Young Guns
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Grant
Young
mentions
Guns,
that's the Wallace one.
Young Guns too. They're both entertaining movies. And if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong with this, but I think he's like Young Guns 2, he like survives and he's an old man and he sneaks away. But but they're good. They're good. It's one of those, it's an entertaining movie. We have to watch. If you've ever seen Young Guns, we gotta
Yeah.
watch those. Those are good movies.
Grant goes to Sickles' legs are like Young Guns 2 is the Wallace one, and then goes to Sickles' like Young Guns is all one movie. Get it together. They're having
Yeah,
fun.
it's definitely entertaining. It's good theater. And I like Estevez. He's pretty cool. He's great in Mighty Ducks too, by the way.
Yeah, oh, I loved him in Mighty Ducks. But yeah, and I'm really looking forward to recording the episode about Wallace just because of all this stuff, you know, out there about him that doesn't really get talked about. Oh, Richard said, enjoying this, like to see more people involved in Civil War history, notably living history and reenactment to promote patriotism. It's their national bot. I have no idea.
What else?
Oh, just a comment in there. I'm like, I don't know if there is a first thing that promotes that. Rushy
No, no, it's cool because you get to history is a thing that if we don't really cherish it, we don't appreciate it,
Mhm.
it goes away. And when you're doing living history, what you're really doing is you're keeping people alive.
Yeah.
Right. There's that old Chinese proverb that people don't actually die until people stop talking about them.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's what a lot of people do. And we do it, a lot of other people do it. And that's what's great about it. But again, you always got to keep an open mind with all this stuff, because not everybody's as bad as you think they are, not everybody's as good as you think they are. But again, you're telling their stories. These are humans.
Yeah.
They're flawed people. They have their goals, they have their prejudices, they have their things. But again, by telling their stories and learning their stories, you learn more about yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot about more modern days, because understanding where we came from. And that's what history is. And that's why we do history. That's why everybody does history. That's the attraction to history is you can learn about yourself and your contemporaries by understanding where we came from.
Yeah.
And denying it and you're just thinking that some of the world is just the way it is right now because of who we are right now.
Yeah.
Is just embarrassing wrong.
Yeah.
But I know we enjoy it. I know a lot of people here. There's a huge Civil War world, as you know.
Yeah.
But there's a huge, Revolutionary War world. There's a huge World War II. Pick one. What's great about this, Mary, is you could be a World War I guy, and then go to a Civil War guy, and then be a Second World War guy, and then move to Canada, be an expert on all of them. so you can have opportunities to do all this stuff, and then complain every step along the way.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a cool thing about studying history. There's no question.
Oh yeah, there is. It's fun doing living history. Like I enjoyed portraying Elizabeth Thorne. I think when we're going to do the event again with them, I might, look kind of at the Confederate side of it and portray John Brown Gordon's wife, Fanny, who was at the Battle of Gettysburg as well. She was with him throughout the war, just to get that other perspective. And that'll be like an interesting one to portray.
Mm-hmm.
The other one too is Granbury's wife was also called Fanny, telling her story. Because she's she's not a well individual. She
no, she was sick, unfortunately.
Yeah, she was sick, but she still goes with him, to during the war. She unfortunately passes away in 1863 from ovarian cancer, but she's still with him. It's real, like hers is a fascinating story too that does not get told at all. And she's buried separate from him, which is really sad.
Yeah, that's a real sad story. And when you look at Fanny Granbury, it's all because there's lost records of who owns the graveyard where she's buried, and so they can't legally move her body. That just seems like such a silly red tape thing.
I know. It's like I think she would want to be with Hiram, and Hiram would want to be with her, because if anything you read about them after she dies, he's not himself ever again, and he passes away just over a year. He gets killed over a year later at Franklin.
No, it's just one of those things. It's just, again, it's all personal stories,
Gentili said, people who like history complain? Never.
Well, certainly not. Absolutely not.
No.
Especially when they're mistreated, Mary. But we should get ready to shut this down pretty soon. So it's almost that time.
Yeah.
We're supposed to go to the beach today, but now it's getting cloudy, Mary.
No, that's fine.
Okay, fine. I guess we can do that. So, all right. So what's coming up? So a couple things for us. So we're
Yep.
doing the episode on Wallace this week.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're doing one on the Battle of Gaines Mill.
Yes.
Right, which is going to be pretty cool. That's we haven't done a battle in a while. Actually, we haven't done a battle. Actually, we haven't in a while.
No, we haven't.
And then we're going down to Washington, Mary.
Yeah.
On July 6th, we're going to record in July 8th,
July
we're
8th.
going to record it. It's going to drop later that week. So Mary and I are going to be doing an episode with Michael Kaufman.
Yep.
And Kim Holian, who's a military historian, about the Lincoln conspiracy. But we're going to do the episode from inside the courtroom.
Yeah.
Where the conspiracy trial was held. We got a special dispensation on this military base of Fort McNair to go inside there and do the episode from the actual room where Mary Surratt and George Atzerodt and Davy Harold and all these people were all tried. So we're going to do it with Michael Kaufman, who is the author of American Brutus, who's probably the most popular writer as far as the Lincoln assassination goes.
Yeah.
And it was a process to be able to do this. I'm not going to lie to you, it was, but it was something that's we're really looking forward to that. So that'll drop late in July as well. So our dance card is full for a while, man. We got a lot of cool stuff coming.
Yeah, and we will probably be back here hopefully next weekend to do one of these lives, our post Wallace live, because our episode about Wallace will drop either late Friday night or early Saturday morning, depending when we can record it. We'll probably record it Friday. And then 2 weeks after that, we will record Gaines Mill, and then we will be July 8th recording from the where the trial was held for the Lincoln conspiracy. So that's
we got to tour there a few months ago around Christmas time, and it's a fascinating place because it's still, I mean, it's in Grant Hall, it's on the military base, and it's right where the hangings took place, which is now a tennis court. But the courtroom is set up the way it was, and they have like pictures of the headshots of where everyone sat, including the justices. You can see where Hunter and Couts and Howe and Eakin, Clendenin, Wallace, Foster, Harris, and Tompkins, where they all sat. And then you can look at the other table and see where Holt and Bingham and Burnett, the prosecutor people, all sat, and they have their pictures, which is pretty cool. Which would be pretty cool. So we'll have a lot of fun with that. So we definitely will. So
yeah. Gentili said, I'd never complain, but when is the LD do-over episode? Many people have been complaining about the Cesnola erasure.
He wants to do the Western Theater, I guess, huh?
Yeah. That was when, remember, we mentioned we were going to talk about Cesnola, and then we never did. Well, he was like, you never got back to that.
We'll get back to it. For God's sakes, freaking Gentili. We'll get back to that. We'll talk about that.
But in the episode, we said we're going to mention him later in the episode, and then we never did.
What would be cool if we did an AMU episode, Aldie, Middleburg, Upperville, just bang, bang, bang. We hit all three. Talk about Cesnola. So there's stuff we could talk about. There's a lot of cool stuff that we could talk about. So, but there's a lot of stuff we gotta get to. There is. So definitely enjoy it. It's coming into that battle season. So get out to your battlefields, tour, read as much as you can.
Yeah.
And then go out there and see the battlefields. It's a lot of fun.
Yep. So we will thank you everybody for joining us this morning, for your awesome comments. They really help keep the discussion going. It's great to love it when you guys ask questions and comment and all that stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, it definitely is. So, all right. So why don't we jump off? We got stuff to do. Have a great, safe weekend. Hopefully you can get outside today. It's going to be warm out. Hopefully it's warm where you are. Hopefully it's not too hot where you are. It's been unseasonably cool, I think. It's been like 70s in the East Coast, which
it's nice weird. Here. The sun's back out again.
No, the sun came back out again. Here we go. So hopefully everybody has a good time. So we have to get ready to do our baseball. That's all starting this week, Mary. Yep. So here we go again. The 3-peat is on. So anyway, we'll catch up to you all soon. So Mary, any final words from you, Fincher, before we jump off?
Thanks everybody for bringing it like you always do. Really enjoyed the discussion as always, Darren. So
definitely, it's always a lot of fun. We said before, there's not a lot of places and people in our real lives that we can sit down and just talk about this. That's what's great about the round tables, these lives, is we just get to nerd out and talk about it. Doesn't mean anybody's right, anybody's wrong. It's everybody's opinion. What's great about history is that it's not math, it's not science, it's all interpretive. So if someone thinks that Lew Wallace sucks, then knock yourself out. That's cool too.
We hope you still listen to the episode.
Yeah, that's the whole thing too. We have a lot of fun with it. We definitely do. So, all right. So everybody have a great rest of the weekend. We'll see you all on the other side. Go Celtics, Mary. Banner 18 is coming. It's coming. All right. We'll talk to you all soon. Have a great day.